and we have to really escalate the noise we make so that we'll be heard.
Welcome to Gay USA. I'm Andy Humm.
I'm Ann Northrup.
And you may have read in the papers this week, it was on the front page of the Times actually, that the Supreme Court is going to hear two challenges to the right of people to same sex to get married.
Yes, they are, and we have been salivating to discuss this with you, our viewers, and with our favorite legal expert, James Essex, director of the LGBT project at the ACLU, who is involved in this case because he is one of those representing Edie Windsor in the challenge to Section 3 of the Defense of Marriage Act. They won at the appeal district.
The trial court, the district court, and the circuit court, the Second Circuit Court of Appeals.
And the Supreme Court is taking that case and the Prop 8 case from California.
And the Prop 8 case was a bit of a surprise that they took it and a bit of a concern because, if they hadn't taken it, same-sex marriages could have resumed right away in California. So that's being put off. Case going to be heard in March and not decided until June, late June probably.
So there are an infinite number of questions to discuss on this because we think the mainstream media have been very cursory in their explanations, and we want to get a little more in depth with James. So we're going to take as much time as it takes this evening to go through both of these cases and all the ancillary questions and try to leave you with a firmer understanding of this.
And we can get James thinking about these questions. Will the court declare a constitutional right to marriage for gay couples?
As the mainstream media thinks is the only question. Or will they, I can't
make
read.
a narrower,
You're going to have to read through these.
Make a narrower but still positive ruling on both cases? Or will they set back marriage equality for a generation by ruling against both? Or will they deny standing in one or both of the cases in terms of who's allowed to even be involved in these cases? And what is that going to mean? Is President Obama going to get involved in the California case as he has in the DOMA case? And what are we all supposed to do while all this is being litigated?
Meanwhile, if we have time after this discussion, there are some other news headlines that we'll address. Same-sex marriage getting underway in Washington State.
The British bill on same-sex marriage is going to allow some religious groups to perform them, but not the Anglicans. But it doesn't extend civil partnerships to straight couples.
Russia looks like it's going to take up federal anti-gay legislation.
I heard the UN Secretary General, Ban Ki-moon, strongly endorse LGBT rights internationally.
And immediately, Uruguay stepped up and started legalizing same-sex marriage.
I'm going to review The Whale, about a 600-pound gay man.
And we'll talk about the Beekman boys, who came out of nowhere to win the Amazing Race.
Okay.
All if we have time.
Now we turn to our guest, James Essex, from the ACLU LGBT and AIDS Project. Welcome.
Yep. Happy to be here.
And how are you feeling right now?
I'm feeling thrilled and a little terrified to have the Supreme Court address both Edie Windsor's case against DOMA and the Prop 8 case.
Okay.
We do have these two cases. We are astounded, shocked, thrilled, scared, all of the above. But we want to be logical about this discussion because this is complex and people are a little at sea about this. So we're going to take this each case one at a time, and we're going to try to walk through the issues in a logical way.
Great.
So your case is the Edie Windsor case. Our friend Edie, who's been on this show and who is 83 years old and had been with her wife for 40 years. They got married a few years ago in Canada, and then Thea, her wife, died, and Edie was socked with a...
And we should say they got married in Canada, but they're New York residents, and New York recognized their marriage.
Correct. And Edie was given an estate tax bill of over $300,000 because the federal government, because of the Defense of Marriage Act Section 3, did not recognize the marriage for estate tax purposes or any other purposes. So she got upset and said, screw you.
I'm not going to stand for that.
Yeah. went to court and won, as in several other cases around the country, challenging the Defense of Marriage Act Section 3 in various details and on various grounds. She won, and the courts have said in her case the Defense of Marriage Act is unconstitutional because she was legally married, and if the state recognizes it, the federal government should recognize it, and this is wrong. So the Supreme Court has now agreed to hear this question and decide whether the federal district courts are right and we should get rid of the Defense of Marriage Act because it is wrong. But they've started with the question of standing. Is it appropriate to bring this case in the first place?
And so, yeah, and they've added, so the question that we presented to the court and that the federal government presented to the court was what you mentioned, which is the Defense of Marriage Act constitutional? Does it violate the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution because it treats married same-sex couples differently than it treats married different-sex couples? And so that's the question that we wanted them to take and that they have taken. And they added two other questions to it. One is a question about the jurisdiction of the court to hear this fight between Edie and the United States. And the other question that they added is a question about whether the House of Representatives has standing to be in the case at all.
And the House is in the case because President Obama is on our side now.
Exactly. So in February of 2011, only a few months after we filed Edie's case, the Justice Department, after a lot of internal discussions, decided that it was changing sides in essence, that it went from defending the constitutionality of DOMA to not defending the constitutionality of DOMA.
While still enforcing it.
Well, exactly, and that actually turns out in the rest of this discussion to be very important. So on the question about jurisdiction, here's what the issue is. The court says, look, does the fact that the Justice Department has switched sides mean that the court doesn't have jurisdiction? In order to be in federal court, there has to be a real fight, not some kind of made-up fight between the two different parties or multiple parties that are in the case. And what the court is asking is, well, look, is there really still a live, viable, true fight here? Or is this not enough of a conflict for you guys to be in court at all? I think our answer to that is pretty simple. Edie, as you said, was socked with a $363,000 federal estate tax bill that would have been zero if she had been a straight widow instead of a lesbian widow. She wants her money back. She wants DOMA struck down, but the specific individual harm that she has suffered is that she had to pay this money that she shouldn't have had to pay. The government has not given her money back because, as you said, they are not defending the constitutionality of the act, but they are enforcing it. So they're saying to Edie, sorry, we're not giving you your money back. They're saying to other people who are affected by DOMA, and DOMA affects many married same-sex couples in many different ways. They're saying to other people, you still can't get health care benefits for your spouse if you work for the federal government. They're saying to other binational couples, you can't sponsor your spouse for citizenship in this country. They're saying to other people, you can't get Social Security survivor benefits for your spouse who has died. All because of DOMA. So in all those contexts, they're saying DOMA is the law of the land until the Supreme Court tells us otherwise.
Could they have chosen to go by the various district court decisions and just said, okay, the courts have said DOMA is unconstitutional, we will no longer enforce it?
Well,
You mean that could Obama have said that?
Yeah,
Look, one of the sort of perplexing things about the court having asked this question is that that's where it leads you to. So, and remember, not all that long ago, we've been through this issue in another context, and it came out a different way in the following sense. In 2004, Gavin Newsom, mayor of San Francisco, says, look, I took an oath to uphold the Constitution, and I think that excluding same-sex couples from marriage violates the Constitution, so I'm going to start issuing marriage licenses. And that case very quickly ended up before the California Supreme Court, which said to Mayor Newsom, look, you're not the guy who decides what the Constitution says about this. We're the people who decide what the Constitution says about this. And yes, you took an oath, but you don't decide what that oath means. We do. And so they reprimanded him and said, you can't just do this on your own. You've got to, if you don't like the law, you can bring a lawsuit to get it declared unconstitutional. And in fact, The city brought a lawsuit. The ACLU, NCLR, and Lambda Legal brought a lawsuit, and at one point I think there were 7 different lawsuits about marriage in California, and we got an answer from the state Supreme Court there. And at the same time,
Which said, go ahead and get
which
married.
said, go ahead and get married.
Which then provoked Prop 8.
and then here we are.
We'll get to that.
And we'll get to that. But so so this jurisdiction question that was asked in the Windsor case, I think raises a question of, well, what is the government supposed to do? Either it has to continue to not just enforce but defend DOMA, and thereby tell trial courts and the Supreme Court something about the Constitution that we now know the administration doesn't believe, and that doesn't seem like a logical thing to say. Or it has to do what Gavin Newsom did, which is just say, okay, well, we're not going to enforce this. And if somebody doesn't like it, they can sue over it.
Just one more technical thing here. The court accepted the Department of Justice's appeal of the Windsor
Yes.
case. Why hadn't the House of Representatives, BLAG, the bipartisan legal
Advisory group.
Yeah, thank you. Didn't they appeal the decision?
Well, they
And wouldn't we be, wouldn't that set up the conflict that the Supreme Court has to decide?
It might. The House BLAG has not filed a petition for Supreme Court review from the Circuit Court decision, the Appeals Court decision that we got in Windsor.
So who is going to argue the other side in the DOMA case?
Well, look, I think that there will be people standing up to argue before the Supreme Court representing the United States, representing Edie Windsor, representing the House of Representatives, and now we've heard from the court there's a Harvard law professor who's been appointed to make the arguments that the court doesn't have jurisdiction and that the House of Representatives does not have standing.
And how would BLAG not have standing to defend a law passed by the House of Representatives?
Well, so the whole BLAG issue comes in, as Andy said, that what happened is the Justice Department says, okay, we're no longer defending this. They write a letter to Congress saying, look, guys, we're not doing this. And then the House moves to intervene and is allowed to intervene in Edie's case and also all of the other, and there are many other DOMA challenges that are pending out there. There is a question as to whether the House can do that. And so the issue is, and in some sense it's the same issue, we'll get to the Prop 8 case, but it's a version of the same issue that is the standing issue in Prop 8. Does the House have a dog in this fight? Do they have their own interests at stake here? And it's not enough to have a view on it or a strongly held view on it. You have to have your own interests at stake. And the question is, even if Congress so one question is, does Congress at all have enough of a stake in this itself to be able to be in the case? Another question is, well, even if Congress has enough of a dog in this fight, does the House by itself have a dog in this fight? Because this wasn't Congress as a whole, this wasn't the Senate and the House, it was just the House that moved to intervene.
All right, one of the concerns out there, in some ways, certainly on our side, is all this moving too fast? And is there a chance that if they deny standing or say that we don't have jurisdiction over this case that we've taken, does that kick the can down the road on the case and say it's up to the next term to take another DOMA case, and then we have to go through this all over again?
Well,
what happens if they deny standing?
As best I can tell, this kicks the can down the road a long ways, because the question about BLAG standing, the question about the jurisdiction of the court to hear a real fight between the parties, isn't something that just exists in Edie Windsor's case.
Right.
It exists in every one of the DOMA cases that's out there. So there were 3 others that the court was considering now, and it's not like the problem would go away if they'd taken one of those. And it's also not like the problem would go away if they took one of the cases that's still in the trial court. What would have to happen is if BLAG doesn't have standing, but Congress does, maybe the Senate would have to agree to do that. I don't think that's likely given the makeup of the Senate right now. And if BLAG doesn't have standing and there's not a sufficient controversy, then it's not clear to me how the issue gets resolved.
And what happens to Edie?
And well, I think that what
Who
happens
is no
is
spring
Edie,
chicken? We love her.
who is no spring chicken, and quite understandably wants to be around to see this this resolved. And she's 83 years old and has had a couple of heart attacks. And she's doing okay for the moment, but obviously in this kind of situation you never know. So it's not clear to me what what it would look like in terms of how do we get to a ruling on the constitutionality of DOMA if this vehicle isn't a vehicle that works.
So you're not fighting the standing issue?
We're going to file briefs and we're figuring out what we're going to say.
Okay, so we're going to get to the substance now.
But just to close this out, if you were a betting person, given that the Supreme Court does nothing but surprise us all the time, is it your guess that standing will be, or jurisdiction will be allowed in this case?
Well, look, what I think we're going to, what I would say to the court at the moment is, look, there is a fight here. There's a real fight because Edie Windsor has a judgment against the United States. She wants her money. She's not getting her money. How much more real can the fight get, folks?
Okay.
And I think that, and if that's right, then the question about whether BLAG has standing or not doesn't really make any difference. There's no question that they're going to get to have their say and get their view before the court. And so I think if I had to bet, I'd bet that on the standing thing, what happens is they say, yes, there is standing here.
Right.
They don't care about BLAG.
All right. So now the substance of the fight against Section 3 of DOMA. Slam dunk, we win, no question?
No, one of the interesting things about having both of these cases, Prop 8 and DOMA, up at the same time is that all of a sudden everyone's like, oh, DOMA's the easy one and Prop 8 is the hard one.
Right.
And I'm not sure that that's right. Look, I think there's no question that DOMA is unconstitutional in my mind under the federal constitution. And we now have, a bunch of courts. I think there are 10 federal court rulings now saying that. So that's a good record to go to the court with.
And a couple
But
that went against us in Nevada and Hawaii, right?
Well, those are on, the Nevada and Hawaii cases are right to marry cases, freedom to marry cases,
Yeah.
not DOMA challenges.
Okay.
Right.
There's one DOMA case from the fall of 2011 in the trial court in California, federal trial court in California, that went against us based on appeals court authority. But we've got 10 courts that rule our way, and that's a good record to go into the court with. I'm hopeful. I think that I know what the right answer is, and I am optimistic that the court is going to agree. But handicapping what the court does is not something that anyone.
we're
Is it going to come down to questions of, standard of review and heightened scrutiny versus rational basis and all that kind of stuff?
And the heightened scrutiny question, which comes up in the Prop 8 context as well, is this: governments, legislatures draw lines all the time, and courts have said, look, you got to treat people who are situated similarly the same. But they're like, look, we're not going to get in the business of second-guessing every legislative decision that Congress or state legislatures make, because we would never be done with that. So they're basically like, look, we're going to give a presumption of constitutionality to different treatment for almost everything. And there's a small universe of laws, of classifications in legal jargon, that the court is going to look at with greater skepticism. And for those classifications, the court's going to say, you know what, we're not going to presume that it's constitutional, we're going to presume that it's unconstitutional, and we're going to ask the government to come and say, why is it that you need to use race or sex or sexual orientation in this context? What's your reason?
But the federal government always recognized interracial marriages, even when many of the states didn't. I mean, they still, for federal purposes, they recognize. Is there any other time when the federal government said, we're not going to recognize a marriage that the states recognize?
No, the only times have been when the federal government was acting not as the federal government, but in essence as a state government. So when it administered territories, like Utah, it did. When it in some specific immigration contexts where it's worried about, is this a fraudulent marriage? Okay. Then it gets involved in sort of looking at the details of that. But that's a very different context from DOMA.
Because, and people should understand out there, for heterosexual marriages, it's different in every state who can get married, what age, what degree of relation.
Yep. It
varies, but the federal government recognizes all of them. This is the case, gays, where they don't.
And they're, with very rare exceptions, recognized state to state, even with different standards.
Yes,
too.
almost always, but not always.
We will not not indulge our desire to get into DOMA
Into all of
Section 2 yet, because
Yes.
we haven't
That's not an issue.
prosecuted that yet. Justice counting is also speculative.
And we're not supposed to count on anybody.
Or not count on anyone. Kennedy wrote the opinions in Romer v. Evans and Lawrence v. Texas that were the two big gay cases, and so we're sort of hoping that he'll agree with us here.
And I hope that's true. And I think I think that I think that DOMA is unconstitutional because the government has not been able to come up with, and the House has not really been able to come up with any reason for why it should treat married same-sex couples differently from married different-sex couples, other than
Tradition.
tradition. We
Well,
don't really like you. We're
but-
really not comfortable with you.
But that is exactly what Scalia said the other day, and said, we have to be allowed to make moral judgments about homosexuality. Now, my disappointment is that once again we have failed to ask the follow-up question about, you can hate someone, that doesn't mean you can discriminate against them legally.
Indeed. And look, that was Justice Scalia's position in Lawrence as well. So he thought that a criminal sodomy law was perfectly fine because it expressed moral disapproval of gay people in very extreme terms, obviously. But he didn't win that. And he lost that 6-3.
So,
And are we going to get Justice Roberts, the Chief Justice?
No, your guess is as good as
Right.
mine.
Okay.
no.
Prop eight?
Let's finish up on DOMA.
Okay.
Are there narrower grounds they could rule other than you get all your federal benefits?
No, I think it's, on DOMA, it's really, it's constitutional or it's unconstitutional. There are different ways they can get there. They can go with the heightened scrutiny ruling. They can say that it fails the lowest level of equal protection analysis called rational basis analysis. And I think we have a solid argument that it does.
Well-
So there are different ways in terms of
Okay.
rationale, but not results.
But we can get married in 9 states. Same-sex couples can in the District of Columbia. That's not very many. I mean, it's a lot of But just saying, it's not. It's not most of the states.
It is not most of the states.
But this is not about the right to marry.
Well, but here's what I'm asking. What if Edie decides to retire to Florida after this? What federal rights will she have when she lives there?
Very good question, and not a question that will be immediately answered by this case.
And the same thing, so all these people, and there are many people who view this show who live in Texas and Alabama and other places who've gotten married in states where it's legal and then they're back. They have no rights. But so it's an open question that will not be settled in this case about whether they will be able to have federal rights?
I don't know that we're going to come out of this case with a clear answer to that question.
But I would be
the res-
optimistic.
We'd have to
Look,
litigate
I think
that, maybe.
we may have to litigate that. I think there's a good argument that they do get. I think the federal government can recognize those marriages, and it may end up being, in the first instance, a question of federal policy.
Okay. On to California.
Yep.
The conventional wisdom was that we wish they hadn't taken the case at all because then people could have gotten married tomorrow in California.
Simply because of that, having California become once again a freedom to marry state is a monumental step forward for the movement.
Right.
No question.
So, again, starting with standing, in this case, you've got the people arguing the case on the other side because the governor, the attorney general would not defend the law, so they let the proponents of Prop 8 step in and be the people who sued. Now, the Supreme Court has been very conservative, relatively conservative, and jealous about who gets to come to court and have standing. Where do you think the standing thing is going to go in this case?
Well, I think
Which would also end it, I guess, huh?
Yeah. So
Because part of me thinks they took this case only to resolve questions of standing.
Well, look, it is true that all of us, looking at this, thought, expected before the orders came out, well, look, we're going to have a potentially blockbuster year in terms of equal protection or due process, the sort of merits issues, the substance of the fight. And it may be that we end up with decisions that focus as much or more on all this wonky lawyer jurisdiction standing stuff as opposed to the merits. We'll see. You're right that the standing issue comes about because the AG and governors say we're not defending. And so you end up with some third party, here the proponents of Prop 8 who put the ballot initiative on the ballot in the first place, coming in and saying, well, we want to defend it. And, okay, so who are they? They are people who care a lot, and they care more than the average bear about this issue. They cared enough to organize a campaign and gather the signatures and put the issue on the ballot. But they're not the state.
How are they harmed?
And a question for federal standing is, okay, what are their rights that are at issue here? And I think there's a not insubstantial argument here that their rights are not affected. I mean, they can get married anytime they want. If they don't want to get married to a person of the same sex, they don't have to.
Okay.
And so it's hard to see how they are harmed other than if you accept the idea that some people do, that straight people's marriages are tarnished by allowing gay people to marry as well.
So if
Well, we went through the trial on Prop 8, which to some extent considered that question, and they were unable to prove any
tarnish,
any harm that had
and
any.
So I think there's a strong argument that they don't have standing.
although the California Supreme Court said that they did.
Yep.
Now, if standing is rejected, whose decision stands in that case? Judge Walker allowed them in the case. The appeals court allowed them in the case. What stands if their standing is rejected?
So if the proponents of Prop 8 don't have standing, then the only decision that governs in the case is Judge Walker's decision from the trial court.
An expansive one.
Because a very expansive one, but one that only binds the parties.
Oh, the three couples that wanted to get married?
The
two county clerks.
County clerks and the governor. But so you've got a situation where you've got a binding final judgment from a federal court saying that Prop 8 is unconstitutional. I think what would happen, certainly with the current administration in terms of the governor and the attorney general in the state of California, is that California would start allowing same-sex couples to marry again, because they were like, okay, Prop 8's been struck down, and we're going to tell all the other county clerks to do the same thing.
Okay.
And I think we will. That's I think how that will end up, if that indeed is what happens.
And there's no little wrinkle here about the fact that the Prop 8 proponents were the opposition in the Vaughn
campaign?
Walker original trial. They can participate in that trial, but then not have standing to appeal.
So as long as there is the governor and the attorney general have said basically what Obama has said on DOMA, saying they're like, look, California isn't allowing same-sex couples to marry now, so they are enforcing Prop 8. They're just saying, but we're not going to defend it because we think it's unconstitutional. And so there is a live fight, but between the plaintiffs who want to get married and the state of California that says we'd love to, but we can't.
Okay.
And that's all you need to have a live Article 3 standing jurisdictional fight in California. So that's why I think his order is fine, and because the state was in, the Prop 8 proponents could come in as extras.
So if the Supreme Court says the proponents do have standing, then we start getting into the substantive
merits,
questions.
and there are many different ways that could come out.
About 5.
At least 5. So
let's go. Why don't you take us
So
through?
we could lose. We could lose big, right? So we could get a decision that says there's no fundamental right to marry that covers same-sex couples, and the exclusion of same-sex couples from marriage doesn't violate the equality principles in the federal Constitution, period. And that would be...
The states have a right to determine who gets married, something that President Obama has said.
Yeah. So we could get that. We could also get a loss that's a narrower loss that would look like this. They could say, look, California is a place that has full domestic partnerships. And so California is treating same-sex couples differently from different sex couples, but not super differently. That is, you got all the tangible rights and benefits, you just don't have the name or the status. And they could say, the name and the status, that's a difference, but it's not of constitutional dimension. We're not going to say that that's an equal protection violation. And so that's a loss that says, well, look, you lose in California, but it doesn't say whether a state that gives nothing to same-sex couples, no domestic partnership at all, also violates the Constitution or not. So that's a flavor of loss that's not as terrible as the first loss, also possible. Not a good ruling, but better than other options. So then we could get a a loss, and I want to sort of give a shout out here to Kenji Yoshino, who's a professor of law at NYU, because he's done a bunch of talking and writing about what the different permutations of a PRE ruling are, and I'm going to adopt some of his language. So there's a procedural one-state solution, meaning that it only applies to California, and it's procedural because what it says no standing. So
A positive ruling. It
yeah.
stands, people can get married.
People can get married not because they ruled that Prop 8's unconstitutional, but because nobody appealed. There's a substantive one-state solution, which means, okay, Prop 8 proponents do have standing, and the case is before us, and we're going to say that Judge Reinhart, who wrote the Ninth Circuit opinion in the appeals court, he's right. And that's a decision that says, look, California is different than other states. California allowed same-sex couples to marry for a period of time, and what the populace in California decided by passing Prop 8 was, we're going to take it away. And he said, well, what legitimate state interest is advanced by taking this away? And he's like, there's none.
And that echoes the Romer v. Evans case that the
Yes.
Supreme Court did almost 20 years
in
ago.
1996, which is about a constitutional amendment preventing gay people from getting non-discrimination protections. But straight people could get non-discrimination protections, and the Supreme Court said that violates the Equal Protection Clause of the federal Constitution as well.
Right.
So that's two different flavors of a one-state solution.
And then there's all the other states that give us everything but marriage.
Exactly. And so that would be, at this point, an 8-state solution on the positive side. And that could say, look, you know, if you, as a state, have gone so far as to provide all the same tangible rights and protections and obligations as marriage, but you don't give them the same name and the status, well, then there's no reason for you to do that other than to express an official difference, an official sort of statement that you guys are lesser, and that violates equal protection.
And let's say what they are: Delaware, Hawaii, Illinois, Nevada, New Jersey, Oregon, and Rhode Island.
Yep.
Yeah.
And, sorry, go ahead.
No, and then
the biggest win is a 50-state win, which would say either because there's a fundamental right to marry that covers gay people, or because the Equal Protection Clause is offended by the exclusion of same-sex couples from marriage, every state in the country has to allow same-sex couples to marry, and that would change the law in 41 states.
now we believe that,
I think that's absolutely true.
but they say the court doesn't like getting ahead of the public, and a lot of these states have voted 81% against same-sex marriage. Maybe they'd only vote 75% now. So the question is the country ready? What would happen?
And look, I mean, I think there are different ways to look at the question about whether the country is ready. You can count states, and we're at 9 states plus DC. I'm hoping that over the course of the next year, we're going to get some more states.
And that's, by the way, what Evan Wolfson of Freedom to Marry is urging. Don't just sit here and wait for the court decision. Get out there and
Absolutely.
work to change the hearts and minds of people, and especially in these states, to convert what they have into marriage. Because one of the concerns about the court doing it is that then other states that might want to do civil partnerships or domestic partnerships won't do that because they're going to essentially have to do marriage.
Yeah, and certainly, like the 8-state solution is something that has pluses and minuses. As you're right, it would make it harder for states to say, you know, you can't be halfway pregnant, little pregnant. You're either at marriage
Right.
or you're not. And I've lost my train of thought.
No.
Where were we?
We were just saying whether the country was ready.
Oh, so one way is to count states. Another way is to look at public opinion, right? In public opinion, we have consistent polls in the low to mid 50s, showing in terms of
We are
support.
skyrocketing towards approval.
Support for nationwide.
George
That's
Will
nationwide.
has given up.
Well, he said the opposition to same-sex marriage is literally dying, meaning they're old and they're dying.
Yes. And another way to look at whether the country is ready is to look at the percentage of the population that lives in freedom to marry states. And if California switches, you know, in one of these different flavors of decision on Prop 8, we're at 28% of the country. And, you know, that's not 50% of the country, it's not 80% of the country, but this is not a marginal movement. This is not a fringe thing. This is something that is very much at the centerpiece of American thought at the moment.
And as people even polled in 2000 said, they believe in the next 100 years that gay people would be able to get married across the country. I mean, people predicted that eventually that's where it's going.
Yep.
And it's obviously going to be sooner rather than later now.
I think that's right.
To tell me if I'm right about this. It seems to me that a loss in the Prop 8 case, meaning the court does not upholds Prop 8 and says it was wrong to get rid of it and Prop 8 is okay, is not a fatal problem for us. We can go back to the ballot and repeal Prop 8. It's not the worst thing in the world that could happen.
No, I think that's right. I mean, look, none of us wants to lose that case. None of us wants to lose the DOMA case. We could lose them both, and the forward momentum in terms of public opinion and in terms of public policy in the states is not going to stop.
Well, Maggie Gallagher thinks you're going to win the DOMA case.
Well, it seems to me that the DOMA case is the more likely win, but would be the worst loss.
Well, it would be very frustrating to lose the DOMA case, certainly. But there is a piece of legislation in Congress. It's called the Respect for Marriage Act.
That's true.
It repeals all of DOMA, both the federal recognition and the cross-border recognition piece. And it's not just like a symbolic bill. It's a bill that's got 150-something members of the House.
It's gaining momentum.
And it's got sponsorship in the Senate as well.
Now
it's a real bill.
Now, we mentioned President Obama because he is on our side in the DOMA case, but has not weighed in on the Proposition 8 case because when he came out for same-sex marriage back a couple of months ago, he did say the states are working this out. So now there is pressure from some LGBT groups for him to get in on the Prop 8 case. Do you want him in on that case, and how?
Well, I think it's unlikely that we're going to see the Justice Department in on that case. They're in DOMA, and because they have to be in DOMA because it's a federal law.
Issue. Yeah.
They don't have to be in the Prop 8 case, and I'm not expecting that. It would be, and quite frankly, I don't know what they would say. I mean, because I don't know what they haven't had to grapple with the question of the constitutionality of state amendments, and none of us wants them to say something bad.
Right.
Okay. We love to speculate on why the court took certain cases and who may have voted for that. Do you have any guesses, inside info?
I have no inside info, and I don't really know. I was surprised that they took both, but that's because I was hoping that they would just take DOMA, because the idea, as we said before, the idea of marriage coming back to life for same-sex couples in California is transformational. Right. So that's what I wanted to have happen. We could come out of this with that, and we'll see. In terms of what was the lineup, they never tell us. And
until they write
their memoirs, or some clerk spills the beans.
Now, some of our viewers complain, and certainly the top of this show for a long time has been about marriage cases and marriage, and oftentimes that's what's making news, folks. That's why we talk about it. It's not the only issue we care about, but there are other issues in this case about LGBT rights that are central to this case that could have big ramifications for us in all of the cases that we bring as LGBT people, correct? And what are they?
Well,
the kind of scrutiny we've got, the kind of way we're treated by the court.
Yeah, so a couple things on that. You're right that the level of scrutiny issue is enormously important, because it's not just about marriage. It's as we said before, the difference between government discrimination against gay people being presumed to be constitutional, and we have to show and convince the court that it's not, versus anti-LGBT discrimination by the government being presumed to be unconstitutional, and the government has to explain to the court why they should be able to do that. That's not hard to see why that's a really different picture. Burden of proof is on them, not on us. There are a lot of different laws that are out there still where that burden of proof change would make our job a lot easier. The remaining restrictions on adoption and foster parenting by gay people would be a lot easier to win. We're doing well on getting rid of them, but it would be a lot easier if heightened scrutiny applied. Government employment decisions, school districts that don't want to hire a gay teacher, they're going to have a much more difficult time justifying that firing if heightened scrutiny applies. There's many, many different contexts where LGBT rights law and litigation would be revolutionized by heightened scrutiny. Now, because it would be so transformational, that may make the court less likely to go there. I'm not sure we're going to, I think it's the right answer, it's, no question. It's not clear that the court is still in the business of of finding new suspect classifications. We'll see, but we're gonna push hard and try to get that.
And they really do surprise us all the time.
They do. But the other thing I wanted to say about marriage, look, I mean, I know there's a lot of folks who feel like marriage is, gets too much attention. Look, I feel like marriage is something that that we can use to our collective benefit. Whether we like it or not, the country values marriage very significantly as a cultural matter. And one of the reasons that, I think the beliefs at the core of homophobia is the sense that we don't form relationships like straight people do. And the marriage, the fights around relationships, whether it's advocacy in legislatures or it's fights in court, are an opportunity for us to directly address those stereotypes and start to break down the assumptions that people have about our relationships. And that, of course, it helps us move forward on marriage, but I think it breaks down on a very basic level the homophobia that is a problem throughout, that we're facing in all the different contexts where our community has troubles. So I think that is a very significant reason to work on marriage and relationships, and it's a big reason that we do as much work on it as we do, because we think it's a way to tap into cultural norms that the country as a whole holds and move us all forward.
But when we single people get our act together, the majority of LGBT people get our act together and start a movement. The
Majority of the U.S. population.
Yes. Well, I don't know about that. 40% of New York lives alone, I think, but whatever. Well, Manhattan.
Yeah,
but I mean, we might get a hearing at the LGBT Rights Project, the ACLU.
James,
Great.
thank
That's
you.
a question.
Yes.
Happy to talk to you.
Thank you.
James Essex, director of the LGBT and AIDS Project at the ACLU, and one of the prime lawyers in the Edie Windsor case about to be heard by the Supreme Court. Good luck.
Break a leg.
Thank you very much.
Have a ball with this.
We hope to be down there.
Fingers crossed.
Okay.
Okay.
Rest of the news in just a second.
So you got all that? I think it was very useful.
I hope so. I hope
It was
people
useful to
understood
me.
it. Yeah, you can look at websites if you want more explanation. But we wanted to give you as much depth as we could. But there is other news, but we'll start with marriage news, just to give you a little segue.
Same-sex marriages got underway in the state of Washington on December the 6th. There's some of the happy couples with their kids.
That's a lesbian couple with 7 adopted kids who are all very happy that their mothers are getting married. There's Greta Kammermeyer, a heroine of the Don't Ask, Don't Tell fight
She's
with
on the
her
left
now
there.
wife. Yes. These guys. This picture went viral around the world because they thought, the movement's over.
Santa Claus got married.
We won. If these guys can show up to get married, we are all set.
That's great.
And finally, Dan Savage and Terry Miller getting their marriage license there. Congratulations to everybody. This is the payoff from the vote in November. Already marriages in Washington state.
And with any luck, these things will spread. In Minnesota, where they beat back that amendment, Governor Mark Dayton said that he'd be happy to sign a same-sex marriage bill. He says, I hope we're going to get to that point, but it's unsure if this current legislature is going to consider it.
The governor of Illinois, Pat Quinn, is also asking the legislature to pass a same-sex marriage bill.
And this week, an out-gay legislator in New Jersey actually proposed, let's go to the ballot and talk to the people, but the head of the legislature said no, and
well, because
they got a court case there.
They have a court decision from years ago that mandated equal treatment of same-sex
Which
couples.
they're not getting.
The legislature decided to do civil unions. They're back in court appealing that. They passed a same-sex marriage bill that Christie vetoed. They're trying to override that. But their stance has always been you can't vote in these referenda on people's civil rights. The legislator is excited by the fact that we've won these last ones,
Okay.
but...
Okay. Any other marriage stuff?
Yeah, in Nevada, the right wing wants the Supreme Court to take the latest Nevada lower court decision and affirm it. It was a horrible, marriages for procreation decision that turned us down. everybody sees this as ridiculous. And in Maryland, we found out that there was a big anti-marriage donor in the last campaign, Michael Peroutka, who gave $10,000, who's a white supremacist. That's who's fighting us. And secessionist, yeah. They're
going to give the money back?
I don't think so. So yeah, that's marriage news domestically.
All right, some religious news. Notre Dame University, a Catholic university, has finally recognized a gay-straight alliance there, but they still don't have a non-discrimination policy.
Yeah, so they've set up an advisory committee on gay and lesbian issues, but
it's progress.
It's progress. There are a lot of universities that are way ahead of them. On the other hand, Catholic University is still refusing to support even a gay-straight
They're
alliance.
very tied in with the Vatican.
The Mormon Church, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, has put out a video and website, I guess, to
love one another, a discussion on same-sex attraction. But the news is that they used to automatically excommunicate you for being gay. Now they're saying, stay. We think what you're doing is still abominable.
We're not going to approve things like same-sex marriage.
Well, wait a minute. They're not approving homosexual activity.
That too.
But they...
And how they think they can argue for gay people to stay with them when they were one of the big financiers of Prop 8 and every other anti-same-sex marriage.
They have adopted the Catholic position. Same-sex attraction itself is not a sin, but yielding to it is.
Charlie Crist came out.
As a Democrat.
As a Democrat.
Nobody asked him about coming out as gay. No, hey, Charlie, now that you're in the process of coming out.
And Jim DeMint is going out.
Yes.
From the United States Senate. Hallelujah.
Although there's a question of whether he will be more effective on the outside. He's a very mean guy and very anti-gay.
Very. And his successor is not likely to be much better in the Senate from South Carolina, still waiting for Nikki Haley to appoint someone.
Yet another corporation has dumped funding for the Boy Scouts. This time it's the Merck Foundation. And again, it says it doesn't line up with our anti-discrimination policies, so why should we give you money?
They have joined Intel and UPS in dropping funding for the Boy Scouts. Now, look, we all want the Boy Scouts to succeed because they can do some great stuff.
Just like the Girl Scouts, which are inclusive of LGBT folks.
Exactly. The University of Iowa becomes the second university and the first big public institution to add optional questions about sexual orientation and gender identity to its admissions application so that they can better serve their entire student body, which is a great thing.
What a concept.
Yeah. 24 rich gay people have asked Congress to support Obama on his fiscal cliff plan on raising taxes on them. They sent him a letter. This includes people like Susie Orman, Tim Gill, Bruce Bastian, Terrence Mack, Laura Ricketts, the co-owner of the Chicago Cubs, Andy Tobias, have all said, yes, raise our taxes.
Well, yes, and we do whatever rich people say in this country.
Yeah. Very prominent political strategist Steve Elmendorf, who worked for Gephardt, John Kerry, Hillary, has now become the new chair of the board of the Gay and Lesbian Victory Fund. This is a whole movement where more mainstream people are now taking on LGBT organizations and getting involved instead of just us fringe people who were doing it in the past.
They haven't had us running those groups for a long time.
No, but we've been on various boards.
At Mission College, where is it? This is the transgender basketball player. Mission College. The team there now has a transgender player, 6'8".
Gabriel Ludwig.
Yeah, and all right, we might not have even mentioned this. It wouldn't have been a big story, but
it's in California.
Yes, but the ESPN radio hosts Steve Saban and Andy Pollin went on a horrible anti-transgender rant, including referring to her with the word "it." Which they said was the politically correct. I mean, it just went on and on and on and on and on, and then they made a non-apology apology. They should be...
They've been suspended.
Yeah, good.
The FBI has put out its hate crimes report for 2011, last year's report, and said that 20% of reported hate crimes, over 1,000, were involving bias on the basis of sexual orientation. Now, of course, this is just a tiny percentage of crimes actually committed, but as a relative number, that's consistent and growing, actually. And sad news from Fenton, Michigan, where 17-year-old Josh Pacheco committed suicide. He'd been bullied, teased, pushed into lockers at school, and didn't tell anyone. And he got himself into his truck in his garage and turned it on. Left a note saying, "I'm sorry I wasn't strong enough." Now, he wasn't able to be strong enough. His teachers knew he was being bullied. His friends knew he was being bullied. Nobody knew it.
Well, I wonder if he, I mean, we hope that all of you who are thinking about this will at least do something like get in touch with the Trevor hotline from the Trevor Project. Look that up on the internet. They have a hotline 24 hours a day where you can talk to somebody about this.
Please tell somebody.
Tell someone, yes, please.
And congratulations to Eloise Klein Healy, out lesbian, the first poet laureate of Los Angeles.
All right.
Yeah.
All right.
All
Some
right.
international news?
Yes.
Well, if we can get the tape ready with David Cameron from the on the British situation. In Britain, they've been talking about putting a marriage bill in, but up until now, it is illegal for any church to do, or synagogue or mosque to do a ceremony. Whereas in our country, if marriage isn't legal, the churches can do what they want. So here's David Cameron talking about how he feels about all this now.
I'm in favour of gay marriage because I'm a massive supporter of marriage and I don't want gay people to be excluded from a great institution. But let me be absolutely 100% clear. If there is any church or any synagogue or any mosque that doesn't want to have a gay marriage, it absolutely must not be forced to hold it. That is absolutely clear in the legislation. And also, let me make clear, this is a free vote for members of Parliament, but personally, I will be supporting it.
Well, no one's forced to do marriage, but on the other hand, they're now forbidding the Anglican Church to do
Well, up until now, they
marriage.
forbade all churches from doing
Yeah.
it. Now, Anglicanism is their state church, but
Yeah.
it's very strange that he would forbid the Anglican Church because he wants to force them to admit women bishops, which they voted against a couple of weeks ago.
Screwy. But
We
things,
don't, they
things,
will always be in England.
things are moving ahead south of the U.S. border, where, first of all, this thing is taken off in Mexico. It turns out that they are on the verge of total legalization of same-sex marriage in Mexico, which leaves us in an interesting position between Canada and Mexico not having full same-sex marriage.
A sandwich.
Yeah, and in Uruguay, the House of Representatives there this week approved a same-sex marriage bill 81-6, and the Senate is expected to go along with this lickety-split, and the president has already agreed to sign the bill.
And the United Nations had their 6th conference on leadership in the fight against homophobia, and Ban Ki-moon spoke, and he's spoken before, but I have never heard a world leader speak so forcefully about the necessity of LGBT rights internationally. And look, it was a big love fest. Ricky Martin was there and people from around the world, but it sends a signal to the entire world community that this is something that's got to be done.
Not such good news from Russia.
Ooh.
Now, the Prime Minister Medvedev spoke against this proposed national no promo homo bill, and Lady Gaga tweeted him thanking him for that. But now it looks like the bill's going to go ahead anyway.
Well, it says they're going to vote on it, but I don't understand how you can have the Prime Minister being against something in his own chamber that's going to pass. But
well, we'll see. And she's now being threatened with prosecution for doing what Madonna did of making pro-gay remarks at her concert. Things are still up in the air in Uganda. More horrible things happening, but no resolution yet on the bill there.
right. In AIDS news?
A couple things.
Well, STD rates in many areas of New York City are soaring, they say, and that's very discouraging, folks. We're going to have to get a big safe sex campaign going on quick.
Yeah, STDs and HIV up, particularly in neighborhoods like Chelsea and the West Village.
And many communities of color around the city as well.
And the Kellen Lord Community Health Center says the City Department of Health is not acting fast enough in publicizing the risk for meningitis for men having sex with men or pushing vaccinations.
And sadly, with all the liberalization of the marijuana laws, the Obama administration is engaging in a further crackdown, basically to keep agents employed in their jobs, which it's not a jobs program, folks. Have them do something useful. And the Treatment Action Group had a wonderful 20th anniversary celebration, including honoring people like Dr. Paul Farmer and Dr. Françoise Barré-Sinoussi, who was one of the co-discoverers of HIV over, well, 1983, 82, 83.
All right, couple more minutes. In entertainment news, congratulations to the Beekman boys, Josh
Oh, yes.
Kilmer Purcell and Brent Ridge. You
Whoops.
may remember Josh as a columnist for Out Magazine. They have their own show, cable show about their experiences running a goat farm. So they went on The Amazing Race, and they were terrible. They almost got kicked out every week.
What do you mean they were terrible? They won.
They got penalties, they got suspensions, they were a mess. And they couldn't do a lot of stuff. But in the end, there was a challenge where you had to use your brain, and they were smarter than anyone. And to everyone's shock, they won The Amazing Race
And it
and
got
won
them
$1
back
million.
together.
They were fine. Well, it got them back together physically because now they can live and work in the same place. So congratulations to them.
Guys. I saw this play called The Whale. It's going to be closing this weekend, folks, so last chance to see it. And I give it credit for getting through some stereotypes. It is about a 600-pound, literally, gay man. It has some themes that I found rather disturbing and things. It can be very funny at parts, but I'm still thinking about what I think about it.
Grammy nominations came out, and there were some gay things. Frank Ocean, who you may remember is the artist who came out about his first love, being a man, got tied for the most nominations, 6, including some for his big song Thinking About You, which is about that. And Rachel Maddow, Ellen DeGeneres, and Janice Ian were all nominated for Best Spoken Word Grammy for audio versions of their books.
And no particular reason to see The Mystery of Edwin Drew, despite having Cheetah Rivera and Jim Norton, although they're good. It's a little dated. And Dead Accounts by Teresa Reedback is also something I would take a pass on.
Look how fast we can do the news when we have to. But we will see you next week with Chris Cooper sitting in. Have a nice time.
Thank you.
Bye.